This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. In addition to recording this podcast, I also write newspaper columns, and this Christmas season, you can give the gift of news and get a special deal subscribing to the publications I publish in. That's the Fargo Forum, Grand Forks Herald, Jamestown Sun, one low price, you get them all. Gift the news, call Santa's hotline at 800-274-5445 and give an annual news subscription for 50% off this holiday season. It's the perfect gift to keep anyone on your list informed. Simply call 800-274-5445 to give the gift of news. Welcome to Plain Talk. Welcome to a very special holiday edition of Plain Talk, where I was supposed to be on vacation, and then in the last episode of this podcast, I told all of you listeners out there that this would be the last podcast of 2021. Plain Talk would be returning to you in 2022, and then I had to correct myself because, oh wait, that's right, I had one last interview scheduled for 2021, and I apologize in advance. I have a horrendous cold, which is, I guess, just part of the. It's part of the season, right? Is you're gonna get one of these every year, and I'm getting mine right now. I feel fine, other than the fact that I don't sound so good, but I have doped myself up, and we're gonna continue ahead. Joining me in just a moment is gonna be Drew Wrigley. He is former U.S. attorney under George W. Bush and Donald Trump. Drew Wrigley. He is former Lieutenant Governor Drew Wrigley. And he's going to join me on the show here in just a moment. But before we get to that, of course, I want to thank you all, as I do every show, for listening. Thank you for tuning in. I have been so happy with the downloads. Just the audience in 2021 for this podcast has really, really grown, especially this late summer and fall. Just thousands of listeners per show, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in. Of course, remember, if you are tuning in via streaming, like if you're listening in your browser or something, if you would think about subscribing through a podcasting app like Spotify or Pocket Cast or Castbox. There's a million of them out there. Subscribe that way, and if you think about it, if you find a place where you can leave a review for this podcast, that helps with the internet's various algorithms, helps other people who might be interested in this show find it. So if you would do those two things, or think about doing those two things anyway, I appreciate it. Joining me now is Drew Wrigley. And Drew, first of all, how are the holidays? Did you have a good one?
We had a great Christmas. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, Kathleen, the kids, and I were over in Fargo with my family over there. My sister and brother-in-law, their kiddos, and my brother and his wife, and my mom. So we had a great Christmas, and now back in Bismarck. It's only 11 below today, so we're getting ready for a bright new year. How about you? How was Christmas?
Had a very good Christmas with our family, and I took the week off, so it's been a week at home with my kiddos and playing video games and playing games, and we're just having a lot of fun. Well, the reason I had you on the show is Attorney General Wayne Stenehjem has announced that he is going to wind down a very consequential career, 40-plus year career in North Dakota politics. He's going to retire. That leads an opening on the statewide ballot. And I got to tell you, Drew, that a lot of the buzz out there is about you potentially running for Attorney General. And I wanted to have you on the show to talk a little bit about yourself. Maybe North Dakotans know who you are, but I think anytime, we're coming around to another cycle like this, it's worth talking about who the key figures are again. And I guess maybe my first question is for you, Drew. Are you going to run for Attorney General?
Well, way to leap right in, Rob. That's quite a first question. I will say that I started off, we did the United States attorneys under President Trump all stepped down on February 28th with the transition to a new administration. That's the regular protocol. And so I spent the next 6 or 7 months working as general counsel for two businesses that my family, I'm a part owner as well, my family owns over in the Fargo area, industrial contracting companies. and spent time there, and have also spent time over these last months exploring the possibility of a run for Attorney General in the event that Wayne made the decision that he did make this week. We were all, I don't want to say caught by surprise, but nobody, Wayne keeps things pretty close to the vest, and no one had any real insight about what he would do. But last week, as you mentioned, Wayne decided that he would announce he's not seeking re-election. Now, he still has a year. You mentioned consequential time that he served as Attorney General here in North Dakota. That's certainly the case. And he's done so ably, and he's got a year ahead. It's going to be consequential as well. I join people all over the state in complimenting and thanking Attorney General Stenehjem for his work, for the work of his office, and for his family's commitment to those endeavors as well, because it's a challenge for families, and it's a sacrifice. So hats off to the Stenehjems, and all the best for the next year ahead, because they've got a lot of important work remaining. He'll be our Attorney General for another almost 12 months, and so our thoughts remain with him. And I spent a lot of the time in the last many months, like I said, exploring the possibility that I would run for Attorney General. I think a person's got to weigh what your background and experiences have been, and also having been in public life, in and out of public sector and private sector work over the course of my career, Rob, you recognize that it is important what a person brings to the table to offer their services to the voters for any particular position. And I've assessed my background and experience as a prosecutor, both federal and state. Of course, I'm a fourth generation North Dakotan and proud to be raising the fifth generation of Wrigley's right here in the state. I was away from the state for a few years, though, when I was a state prosecutor in Philadelphia in the DA's office, one of America's most violent cities, and it was a remarkable experience in those 5 years, working on the front lines of violent crime, drug trafficking, you name it, in this country. And here in North Dakota, came back after that experience and was fortunate enough to be appointed as the U.S. Attorney under George W. Bush, a position I served in for 8 years after being confirmed by the United States Senate. And, those were consequential times, and we can talk about that if you'd like. I'm proud of the work that our staff and we were able to accomplish in those years. And I also would bring executive experience, both gained in the private sector and public sector. Public sector as U.S. Attorney, and then also in my time as Lieutenant Governor. So, I think I look to those experiences, and in the event that I did run for Attorney General, I would bring a background in extensive law enforcement, 10 total years as United States Attorney. Really blessed to be the only person to ever serve twice under two different presidents, be appointed as U.S. Attorney, and it was a privilege and a job that I enjoyed very much and threw myself into and felt honored to work with the men and women in uniform all across the state and law enforcement and federal agencies, and the work that we did on behalf of the state, the region, and even the United States. And then a person's also got to look at the political realities of what it takes to run a campaign, a statewide campaign for a job like that. And I've made those assessments. I've been very heartened, I have to say, very heartened by the conversations I've had with friends and contacts in law enforcement across these last many months, people out around the state who work in the political realm, or are involved in political races and that sort of thing, and then people who have offered to, if there's a campaign, offered to be supportive both with their time and effort, and then also with the financial support that's so critically important in these races, so that you can get your message out and run a campaign that's worthy of the job of Attorney General. So I can't tell you how thankful I am to the people who've taken time. I've consumed a lot of coffee in the last 6, 7, 8 months with people all around the state. My work across the years, Rob, has afforded me the opportunity to really be out into all corners of North Dakota. And it's a state, like I say, when you've got 4 generations, you're the fourth generation in your family to be in a state, you end up with a wide geography of relatives and friends and people you worked with, and that's certainly one of the blessings that I and my family don't ever take for granted. So, looking back at my background and looking at what the job entails, what I know the kind of energy that it takes for a job like that, and commitment to public service, but then also being able to put together the campaign that's worthy of the position, and that you think can ultimately be successful. Those are the things that go into the months that lead up to it if you're seriously considering these matters. And I've been doing that. And I can tell you, I've made that decision. I made that decision in the not too distant past year. Made the decision about what I would do in the event that Wayne decided he was not going to seek re-election. And so now we're at that point. Here we are. It's the holidays. People don't want to be talking about politics too much, I guess, except for your listeners, right?
Except for my audience always likes talking about politics.
Yeah.
We're the people who talk about politics at the time. Although I like to think that my audience, we get along with it okay. We talk about politics all the time in my family, and it's. I don't know. I always hear these stories about families that don't get along around the dinner. I don't know. Like since I was a kid, we would talk about the issues of the day, and we'd have and it is what it is. I don't know. I don't think we should shy away from politics. I don't know. You sound you sound like a man who, obviously, I think anybody, when you have somebody like Wayne Stenehjem already in that position, who had such a wonderful career, both in the legislature and then later as Attorney General, you don't. If you're a fellow Republican, that's. Wayne's already got the job, right? So, but now that Wayne's made a decision, it sounds like you've made a decision. It sounds to me like you're running.
Well, I have made a decision, and I'm, I would just tell you that, we're not going to make a formal declaration one way or the other about that today. I will tell you that the first step the first formal step that anyone would take along those lines would be to file their campaign paperwork and the official filings with the Secretary of State's office, and I just tell you that in the next in the next days here, you might want to check with the Secretary of State's office. Maybe I'll give you a shout. I'm not trying to be coy about it. I'm just saying that That's
a little coy. That's a little coy. I'm not trying to be coy, says the very coy man.
Yeah. I was going to say too, though, you were mentioning the talking about politics. I couldn't agree more with that idea. I grew up in a house that my parents weren't politically active from the standpoint of they weren't involved in party politics, and
it was more in my family. It was always more issue stuff. Like I don't really remember sitting around talking about
it.
Right.
Yeah. All the time. We talked about politics all the time, and I had, like a lot of families in North Dakota, I had one more conservative parent and one not so conservative parent. So you kind of grew up knowing that if you're going to talk politics, and we did a lot at our table over the years and still do, you kind of had to figure out how to term things in a way that you didn't end up with one of your parents irritated with you about politics. But we've always enjoyed that at our house, all the generations, and it's I think it's important. I always say to my kids that I'm not going to urge anybody to run for office or go and be immediately involved in politics forever. You just start off with you hope that they always recognize how important these matters are, and to debate and discuss these matters with their friends, neighbors, and family, and then to be voters. As a baseline, always make sure that you go out and you use that precious right to go out and put your thumbprint on an election.
Part of being a citizen. It seems to me like your background sort of uniquely commends you to Attorney General, and for two reasons. And I think you kind of touched on them already, but I wanted to focus on them a little bit because you have a background in law enforcement. You worked as a prosecutor at the state level. You've worked as a prosecutor, 2 different stints under 2 different presidents at the federal level. But you also have had your foot in the political realm as well. And a lot of people maybe don't realize this. There's a lot of people who might be very, very good in an elected position at doing just the duties of the job, but maybe aren't so good at doing the things that get you elected to that position. And that's just the simple reality of our system of government, is you don't get to hold the office if you can't win the election. You have not only been on the statewide ballot before, granted as a lieutenant governor under former Governor Jack Dalrymple, but you've done work for the state party as well. Talk a little bit about your background, because we've talked about sort of your professional bona fides. Yeah. When did you first get involved in politics? What drew you to politics? What drew you to the Republican Party and to be involved?
I'm glad you asked that. My very first meeting, organized political meeting that I went to, was when I was being introduced as the executive director of the North Dakota Republican Party. I had never been active. I'd always been a Republican, and I was, I'm a conservative person, and anyone who knows me well knows that well. I'm a conservative person, and I am, I'm a lifelong Republican. But like I say, I hadn't been active in party type politics. I didn't even know how to get involved. I know my family was involved that way. We just talked about these issues a lot. Well, I bore you with the whole long story, but met somebody who was going to be running for, in fact, it was Curly Hauglin. A lot of your listeners know Curly. He was running for party chair in 1999. And Curly and I became acquainted, and he got to know my background and sort of what professional skills I had honed as a prosecutor in communication, and I think maybe he sensed that I would probably be a pretty hardworking person, and we just kind of hit it off. And next thing you know, Curly's telling me, you know what, if I'm it, you're it. I said, well, I'm it what? He said, well, if I get elected, he said, I'd really like you to seriously consider being my executive director. Well, ended up that all came to play out. And I worked in that cycle, the 2000 election cycle, and you mentioned Wayne Stenehjem. Wayne Stenehjem was elected for the first time in that cycle, as was John Hoeven, elected to his first term as governor. We had Jim Pullman was elected insurance commissioner in that cycle, and we really ran the table. We had a very successful cycle. But the importance to me of that experience was, you figure out in a hurry how hard people work on these campaigns and elections, whether there's somebody's running for local office, county office, statewide office. And really, and that's a bipartisan matter, by the way. I'd point out, and my friends on the Democrat side of the aisle, the executive director that year, Darren Lee, and I struck up a friendship.
I know Darren. Yeah.
And yeah, good man. And I think that people looking at this stuff the right way, just understand you really respect people who are throwing themselves into this work and working hard to try to pursue policy objectives for, your state, your county, the region, and beyond. And so that was a formative experience. I was lucky to have that opportunity and worked hard at it. And we had put together an amazing team of volunteers all across the state. And our voter turnout effort was it sound old-fashioned, probably by today's standards in some ways, but it was old-fashioned, and it was really about voter contact, letting people know what our candidates were about, strongly urging that they go out on election day, or they could vote up to a couple weeks early if they wanted to do that. And then we had a big blizzard, by the way, that day, and so we were glad we had kind of an early vote going on in the weeks leading up. So anyway, it turned out well, but it was a formative experience, and it's something that I already had a healthy respect for people who are involved in this work, Rob, but I left that with some great friendships.
You said that sounded old-fashioned. That's still what works in politics today. I mean, you look at the ground games. But, the ground games that put candidates over the top today is meeting with people. I mean, getting volunteers out, knocking on doors. Like that's still, even despite Facebook and Twitter and email lists and everything else that the campaigns do.
Yeah. That's
still the thing that matters most. And maybe in North Dakota more than anywhere else, where we're such a small population, our voters still expect to meet with their candidates.
I think you're right about that. It's something like I described the last 6-7 months of just even assessing whether I would decide to be a candidate for office, was doing the same type of thing, though on a different scale than you would do if you were actually in the middle of a campaign. That's something too that if it was part of the preparation for a decision on this matter. If I was going to conclude that I was going to run for a statewide office, I had to be prepared to set everything else aside and run full time. And, in the event that we get to that point here in the next days, Rob, that's what people can count on. I'm going to run full time. I would be all over the state of North Dakota, in every corner of the state, for whatever gatherings and political media, any place you can sit down with people and have some coffee, talk about things, go to an organized meeting or organize a meeting. It's important that people get a chance to ask you questions, give you their thoughts on things, and help get a sense of what you're going to do in office. I'll tell you, both times I stepped down as United States Attorney, and this was true even when Jack and I decided not to seek re-election in 2016. When you step away from these opportunities, if they're jobs that you take seriously, and I have, and you throw yourself into the work, when the time comes, and inevitably it does, the time comes to step away from it, it's about I think it's about 85%. I'd put that. I walk out and I say about 85% of what you do. Of course, the public isn't sitting there watching you, writing on your legal pad or working through legislative matters or having the phone calls that are necessary with the people that you've got to be talking with, or going to meetings and giving speeches, but then sticking around and having conversations with people. And then the meetings and the work of policy making and policy promotion and also assessing all the stakeholders and their perspectives, all of that work, 85% of it, like I say, it doesn't end up on TV. They're not talking about all the things that go into it. Basically those are not news events. But it's 85% of the work that people aren't even, don't even have a direct view of is that some of the stuff you miss the very, very most, because you recognize that you're privileged to be in a position to help formulate policy for the state of North Dakota, whether when I was U.S. Attorney, making decisions about our budget and allocating resources and what we were going to direct our attention to and what were going to be our primary objectives in the office, how are we going to handle civil litigation on behalf of the United States. That takes a lot of back-breaking work, frankly, and you've got to be committed to doing it. And when you step away from it, if you're someone like me, you miss it when you step away from it, because you know what a privilege it is to hold a position like that.
That's something I wanted to dig into. Obviously, you're not taking anything for granted for this campaign. It's very early. Eventually, we're probably going to see some other candidates get in. The only other name I've heard thrown around is Wade Webb. He's a district court judge in Fargo. I gave him a call just because I'd heard his name on the rumor mill. He didn't want to offer me any on the record comments other than I think we could just conclude he's thinking about it. He has a limitation, whereas a district court, he has to resign his judgeship before he could campaign. So, that's a big obstacle for him, a big decision that I guess he's going to have to make at some point. But anyway, that's the only other name that I've really heard. So again, not taking anything for granted, but let's talk about this. If you run, if you win, what are the challenges North Dakota's facing through the lens of the Attorney General? And I want to be very clear. Maybe a lot of people don't understand all the different things that North Dakota's Attorney General does. We've hit, pretty hard on the law enforcement aspect of it. The Attorney General is in charge of the state BCI, which is an investigatory law enforcement agency. The Attorney General, obviously, it doesn't get involved typically in direct prosecution, but does things like the crime report. I mean, very involved in law enforcement, but also on the civil side. When the state of North Dakota sues the federal government, or the state of North Dakota gets sued by somebody or some entity or some group or some interest, that's the Attorney General's job. The Attorney General provides legal counsel through his staff or her staff, as the case may be, to the various state agencies. And the Attorney General sits on boards like the Land Board or the Industrial Commission, where or not, is the Attorney General on the Land Board? Why did I just had a panic moment that maybe I said that. That's not right. I forget all the different boards. I get confused. I always have to go look up the membership. But the Attorney General sits on boards as a voting member as well. So the Attorney General has a lot of duties, and from your perspective, if you held that job, what are your priorities coming into office?
Well, the first thing I would, not all your listeners, pardon me, I haven't worked with all of them, obviously, but anyone who's worked with me, I think, would recognize my attention to the importance of personnel. Like, who are the people that you are surrounded with as a leader of any organization, and also what's the vision that you impart to them, because they're doing their work on behalf of the state of North Dakota every day, and so you want to recruit, retain, and motivate an absolutely extraordinary staff. And I know we have a which is
interesting. I mean, to interject, I mean, that's something Wade said when I interviewed him just about a week or so ago, after he announced his retirement. That was the thing he said to me. The key to his success was hire good people, let them do their jobs.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth. Now, in my 2 stints as U.S. Attorney, I've hired roughly 70% of the staff in that office, and they stay permanently between. They become civil servants and they stay in between. But that's a key matter in any office. And I know that our Attorney General office has tremendous people, but there are always retirements and departures, and you got to be prepared for that. And then also motivating people along the lines of your vision for the office and for the state. And also I'm a very accessible person. Everyone recognizes in a hurry the adage, that the door is always open. People know that I not only welcome, but I expect staff and people that I work with to interact routinely with me and and keep me apprised of what's happening and where we have to, share some guidance and think about things that going forward. We're going to do that. So I'm going to be accessible. And that includes to the public and stakeholders and people who have business before the state of North Dakota or who have matters of concern to the AG's office. I'm going to be an accessible attorney general. Also transparent about my work. I'm a horrible card player. I don't play cards. I show cards, and I do that in my leadership positions in an office. I tell people all the time, and I would challenge anybody to have an example to the contrary. No one ever takes a bullet from me. I never ask somebody to take a bullet from me. As I told my staff in the U.S. Attorney's Office many times, I take the bullets. But I just, maybe tell me where the entry wounds are coming. You can tell me where that's going to happen. We got to communicate. But I think that's important in an accountable servant leader. I think you've got to make people understand that you are going to be the accountable person for an office that is run in a transparent and an attentive way. And those are going to be the hallmarks of the work. And we're going to work hard. We're going to work hard. The taxpayers in North Dakota pay those salaries, and we've got to earn them every day. And we're going to continue to take those matters seriously. And I know that they do that. We've got a really good Attorney General's office, and the goal is always to continue to build on the shoulders of the greats that come before us. And that's what I've tried to do in my past position, and that's what I would do in this regard. Also, you mentioned law enforcement. I've got the background experience and drive, frankly, and vision for what maybe some adjustments and things we need going forward to be the chief law enforcement officer for the state of North Dakota, and work closely with the state's attorneys and closely with, as you said, overseeing BCI, and then those relationships with federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement are so critically important. And I would bring that background of experience existing into the role as the chief law enforcement officer for the state of North Dakota. I think it would put me in good standing with the legislature as well, an understanding of that background and experience that I bring, both as a hands-on prosecutor. Even when I was U.S. attorney, which in most jobs around the country, most U.S. attorneys, it's a purely administrative job, like you were just overseeing the work of the office. But in an office this size, I was able to take on prosecution matters myself, and in a couple of cases, innovative, new, breaking ground type of prosecutions. My first time as U.S. attorney, I personally was the lead trial lawyer on the very first federal internet luring case that was ever tried in federal court here in North Dakota. And in the wake of that, this office has become a leader regionally, and there are people in the office that are national leaders on the issues of internet crimes, mostly against kids, but other crimes that have taken place, trafficking, and trying to lure underage people for inappropriate purpose. We took those matters seriously. We elevated that issue significantly, and the sentences we were getting in federal court in the wake of taking those on helped policymakers in North Dakota institute mandatory minimum sentences for those same crimes under state law. I think that's an important thing. And then most people are familiar with the case of Drew Shadeen abducted up in Grand Forks in 2003, and then subsequent arrest and prosecution of Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a case that I personally tried as the lead trial lawyer across a couple of years, frankly, with pretrial motions and everything else, tried the case, and then had the privilege, after we did get conviction and then death penalty, and I had the privilege of representing the United States in arguing that case to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, where we were ultimately successful. It went on to the Supreme Court of the United States, which rejected 9-0, even hearing the case. And those are just a couple of examples. I tried some other cases, some drug cases, some gun cases, and other matters as well. So I've got that experience, the practical hands-on experience.
Let's talk about
and then also oversight as an administrator and law enforcement leader. And then you mentioned civil. That's
well, I wanted to get into that because so many of our policies today are end up getting settled in civil court, whether it's abortion bills, voter bills, voter ID bills. I mean, a lot of those get challenged at the state level. And then also, I mean, the state of North Dakota suing the federal government over, say, energy regulations or environmental regulations that or agricultural regulations that Attorney General Wayne Stenehjem's office, and I agree with him 99% of the time, felt like they're, when the state of North Dakota feels like, hey, you're overstepping your bounds. So let's, in the few minutes we have left that you've given me today, talk a little bit about the civil side of things.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned it, Rob. And and forgive me for the filibuster here. People are going to think I'm running for Congress or something with the filibuster here. I just I'm pretty passionate about these issues, and I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak.
Well, the great thing about a podcast is I can ask a question and then just let the person listen, and I usually don't have to interrupt.
Let them freelance. Well, yeah, the civil side, I think, it's interesting, right? You look around this country right now, and there's a feeling, I think, that people have as they look out across the United States, and I think it's a very real, and I think it's been coming along, fermenting for quite some while. The sense that we've lost attachment to proximate attachment to too much of our daily lives. We feel like liberty's been robbed from our states and drawn into Washington, D.C., and now we've got a really complicated situation. Anytime we want to have a regulatory reform regarding whether it's the energy sector or water use and a host of different issues, all the infrastructure projects taking place in the state of North Dakota, and you want to move water from the west to the east, which we all identify as a critical component of North Dakota's economic future. You want to do matters like that, there's a federal,
or even an emerging industry where we want to bring carbon from other parts of the country through a pipeline into North Dakota.
Right.
And eventually that's gonna end up in court, and the state of North Dakota is probably gonna have to have a position.
I think, well, there's no question about it. And I think that, to get right to the point of this, I think one of the critical matters that anyone running for Attorney General, not just in North Dakota, but in the region and around the country, I think should be asked whether they've got a commitment, and I do, a commitment to banding together with other states and finding ways to reclaim for states the authority that we've ceded too often and for too long to Washington, D.C. And it doesn't stop there. I think I know you hear this around the state of North Dakota at times too, that there's a feeling sometimes that are we doing enough here to ensure that under our Constitution and under our laws in North Dakota, to the greatest degree possible, that we maintain enough power and control and oversight at the county level, in the municipal level, and then in people's individual lives, that they've got the ability to exercise authority over their lives and over their communities and over their county. I think it's such a simple, straightforward thing that people are feeling, that they want to feel like we're controlling our destiny, and that they're not overregulated, overmanaged, and over instructed, as well. And then, this comes up in the face of these of face mandates, the face mask mandates, and vaccine mandates, and some of this. That's the one that's on the news every day. But people, and that's important, but people feel this in so many different areas of their life. And I think it's important that attorneys general and candidates for attorneys general around the United States talk about these matters. Are you committed to the federal system that we really had envisioned under our Constitution? Are you committed to fighting for states' rights?
Yeah.
And within your state, are you committed to fighting for community rights?
Well, that's even a debate that runs alongside the actual. I mean, you mentioned some of these very controversial, hot topic like masks, like vaccines. There's really two debates going on there. One debate is about the policy: should there be a vaccine mandate? Should there be a mask mandate? But then the other debate, where I think attorneys general, as you mentioned, can really get involved, is who, in accordance with our laws and, of course, our state constitution, our federal constitution, who gets to make those decisions? Because that's as important as the policy itself. And a lot of times I think that question gets lost because, the public, we get so focused on, well, I want there to be a vaccine mandate, or I don't want there to be a vaccine mandate. And so I'm fine with whoever is just going to promote my position. And there's the principle. We have to take a step back and say, well, no, we have a process for this, and the right people need to be making that policy in accordance with our laws. And I think that's probably one of the most consequential things you've said during this interview.
I think it's an important matter, Rob, and I know that, anyone who's worked with me, I think they would draw from that experience, even if it's across the table, you say opposed, whether it's other side of the party or other side of an issue working in law enforcement. I think people would say that I'm accessible. I'm prone to listening and hearing people out. I want to hear all the stakeholders. I want everybody in the room at the same time. I don't make backroom deals. I'm not interested in doing things outside of the public sphere and then hoping you can just move it along and that could be the policy objective and on to the next thing. I always, tell my kids, anyone else who will listen, that a person's got to be prepared to stand up, say what you believe, how you concluded that, what your process was for getting there, what you believe, being accountable for the results, or frankly, for the failures, and then adjust. There's no shame in that. Public life is no different from people's regular life, I'll call it. There are days that you sink the 3-pointers, and then there are days that something didn't go well. Then adjust midstream. You owe that to the people of North Dakota, and I think you got to do that most effectively. You've got to be willing to stand up, articulate what you're doing and why, how you arrived at that conclusion, what your decision is going forward, and then be open to being accountable. You got to be 100% accountable for how it's playing out and why maybe you should make some adjustments, or why you're not going to. You know what I'm saying? It's got to be an ongoing commitment to that type of level of communication and being open to it. And I always say you got to be willing to take I'll call it the public relations hit, because anyone who's decisive, anyone who has strong perspectives on things after they gather information and they based on their experience and the information they have and their very best assessment. Well, when you draw that line and you make those conclusions, there are always going to be people on both sides, that people that agree with you and people who do not. And I've always worked hard to be a person who isn't afraid to address those matters with people who I don't agree with at that moment and go forward, and then being open to their input going forward. And it takes a lot more time. It takes a lot of effort. But everyone knows my phone is always available. I'm always reachable. If I can come out and meet with somebody personally, I'll do that. If not, I'm not tough to get on the phone, and that's certainly the approach I would take. If I had
democracy is
Attorney General.
Democratic, accountable government is hard when you're doing it right, and that's the way it should be. All right. Well, I think I've used up all the time you've given me. When did you tell me to check with the Secretary of State's office later this week? I got to make a note to myself.
No, if I were you, let me see, Rob, you're a friend. I'll tell you, if I were you, I would check early next week.
Early next week. All right.
Yeah. And I do thank you for the opportunity to talk with your listeners today. And if I spoke a little longer on some of these matters than you wanted me to, that's the style, and that's what
squarely. I think most of the other times I've interviewed you have been in the talk radio, and no offense to my talk radio friends, but every time you're interviewing somebody on talk radio, there's a commercial break looming, right? And it's like you got to hurry the person along. I don't know. I think interviews are better. The great thing about podcasts is I can ask the question and then let you answer. And if I feel naturally like, I want to interject or guide it along, I can. But, that's the great thing about this medium. So I thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, Drew. Have a wonderful
Thank you
to
you and your listeners, Rob, and Happy New Year to everyone. And I look forward to seeing people up the trail.